Welcome everybody to our last RSVP Digital Salon of this 2021 Spring Series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kaari Newman. I'm the Webmaster and Social Media Coordinator here at RSVP. And as a member of the Digital Salon Committee, it's my pleasure to moderate this panel on doing research as an independent scholar. So RSVP has long supported the research of independent scholars. And I've just lost my notes, so 1 second. Whose research intersects with the wide world and long history of Victorian periodicals. In the wake of COVID-19's impact, many are unsure about where academic austerity is going to take us, and those of us who work in academia. But while not all scholars seek academic positions, those who do often wonder what it would take to continue doing rigorous and satisfying research apart from a university setting, and hence the reason for this topic. And with us today, we have an excellent panel of scholars who have done exactly that. So Judith Flanders is a journalist and a highly acclaimed author of both fiction and nonfiction. In addition to her Sam Clare mystery series, she writes regularly about history, theater, dance, and the contemporary arts through the Sunday Telegraph, Wall Street Journal, Spectator, the Times Literary Supplement, and the artsdesk.com. Her most recent nonfiction book, A Place for Everything, The Curious History of Alphabetical Order, which was published in 2020, traces the long history of using alphabetical order as a sorting system. Helen Rappaport is an international best-selling author, media consultant, and freelance historian who specializes in the period 1837 to 1918 in Britain and Russia. Her forthcoming books include a history of Russian immigration to Paris after the revolution, which will be coming out in the US, and a much anticipated biography of Mary Seacole in the UK, and both of those are due out in spring 2022. Marie Legere Saint-Jean is an independent scholar and digital humanist based in Montreal, where she edits Price One Penny, a database of cheap literature, 1837 to 1860. Her research focuses on early Victorian fiction published in penny weekly numbers and its role as a nexus in the Western transmedia popular culture. Patrick Leary, who almost needs no introduction in this crowd, is a former president and longtime member of RSVP. He is the founder and manager of the Victoria Listserv, and he curates the Victoria Research Web, which I have found to be a real treasure trove of Victorian research resources, both old and new. He's also the author of The Punch Brotherhood, which is a prize-winning study of how oral culture shaped this iconic Victorian periodical. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us today. So the format for today is a little bit different than some of our other salons. This will be a very open, fluid question and answer session. So I hope everyone has brought questions with them that they're dying to ask. We encourage everyone as part of that to turn on their cameras if you're comfortable with that, and unmute yourself to ask a question. If you're uncomfortable with that, my colleague, Helena Goodwin, will be monitoring our chat box. So if you'd rather type a question in the chat box, we'll make sure that it gets answered. So I'd like to kick off our conversation today just with a question that I think, as we were talking, before heading on here, about sort of something that it might be more of interest to people who work in academia than not. We've called our panelists independent scholars in our advertising, but how do you relate to that term? And for that matter, how do you relate to the term academic when it comes to scholarship?
Do you want any of us to answer?
Yeah, I see Patrick's raised his hand. Anyone can answer.
Shall I answer? Or well, let Patrick go first and then I will.
Oh, all right. Thank you. I don't, I've just never gotten used to the term. I know the term has a certain usefulness, but I've just never gotten used to it, in part because it feels imposed on a great variety of scholars. It's a way of saying, this is what sets you apart categorically, as categorically different from the rest of us. And I encounter this mostly in dealing, for example, with the conferences, where you have to have something on, they want something for your name badge that gives your affiliation. And they can get very shirty if you say, well, I don't have an affiliation. And they'll say, okay, well, we'll put down independent scholar. And if you say, No, I'd rather not. I'd rather just have my name, but then they don't like that. And I think that's a subtle bit of pressure and ghettoization of independent scholarship that, I mean, it's unintentional, but I think that really, it sets independent scholars apart, and not necessarily in a good way. So I think scholarly societies need to be a little more sensitive about that.
Can I come in now? Is that okay?
Go ahead, Helen.
I have never ever used the term to refer to myself as an independent scholar or an academic. I've always considered myself, I guess, a freelance historian stroke writer. I have always had difficulty because people always assume, because I do history and Russian history, which people for some reason think is very esoteric, that, I must be an academic, I must be at a university, but I've never held a university post. I've always, I guess, been a trade history writer, for want of a better term. But what I find particularly interesting is something an agent once said to me many years ago when I was looking for a representation. And I went to see him and had a meeting with him. And he said, well, of course, and he said this very grandly, well, of course, you're not a historian, you're not an academic, you're a non-fiction writer. And that's how he defined me. And it's as though in order to be, to have credentials, to be taken seriously, you have to have an academic qualification or link. So he said I was only a non-fiction writer because I didn't have an academic post. So I don't know how everyone responds to that.
I think it is very much a term of othering used by academics, or to echo what somebody said to Helen, I was once told that I wasn't a proper historian.
Yeah.
And I must admit, when Patrick said, you have to put independent scholar on your little name tag, the thought had crossed my mind of putting improper historian. But yeah, I mean, I see in the chat box, people are asking for a definition of the term. And I think that's sort of the point, is that for us, it really hasn't got a definition. And we don't use it. So it is a term imposed, it is an othering term.
Maybe it's just unaffiliated is a better word. I don't know.
Yeah, can I come in here?
Sure, Amanda, come on in.
Thank you. I'm actually serving as president of the National Coalition of Independent Scholars, and we do have a definition of independent scholars, which is the usual one, which is that an independent scholar is someone who does not hold a secure academic post. Therefore, independent scholar can be quite a wide remit. It can cover postgraduates, it can cover emeritus professors, it can cover people like me who are adjunct faculty. And I basically only teach a few hours a year. But that doesn't, I consider my main identity as being an independent researcher or independent scholar, and that doesn't bother me at all. In terms of affiliation, I give NCIS as my affiliation, not the university, who give me a few hours work, but who do not support my research at all. And I think identity, from what I'm hearing from you as well, identity is really quite an issue for independent scholars, because nobody knows where to put us. And it's certainly othering, but that doesn't mean that we're a failure, that we're not good at what we do, because we have either not got an academic post, have never sought an academic post, maybe don't have a PhD, don't have that academic background. There are many ways of doing research.
So if I can jump in, I it really sounds like conversations that have been had in minority groups about reclaiming the term dyke for lesbians, for instance, because I really feel like, so when I started becoming a proud independent scholar is when I was no longer working on the PhD that I never completed at the University of Cambridge, and was starting to feel like writing in Cambridge as my affiliation, now that I was no longer registered, didn't really make any sense. And so I decided, yeah, okay, I'm an independent scholar. And it took a bit of a transition, but it happened within a year. And I found around me that presenting myself as such at conferences, it did, some people felt like, oh my God, but you cannot not finish your PhD and stuff like that. But other people were like, that is so courageous. It's good to know that it's possible. And you're offering me hope. And also, in the summer, I co-founded a community for independent scholars with Simon Rosenberg, who's somewhere in the room. And our definition is people doing research outside of academic settings. So it sounds a bit like the definition Amanda has.
Marie, it would be great to hitch up and have a chat, because what we find is there are an awful lot of little groups that start up for exactly the reason that you started your group up. And the NCIS is a coalition of those groups. So, and we're not for profit anyway, but the whole point is to network and have a community of independent scholars, because there are an awful lot of us about. And if you include adjunct faculty in that, that is most academics actually kind of count as independent scholars. So we're not so marginal as people would think.
Can I ask a question? Would you consider someone such as I, who's very much a trade historian, as not being a scholar?
I'm personally all about self-identification. If you like the term, if you identify as it, I'm not going to be policing anyone for using the term. I think it's useful to have a term like historian. It's much easier than like literary scholar. You're stuck with the word scholar. There's no equivalent to historian in some other fields. In philosophy, you could be a philosopher, but in literary studies, we end up with the term scholar, which is at least exists in English. It doesn't exist in French, and that's very frustrating because you can't talk about scholarship in French. You need to talk about university research. So I do university research, even though I'm not at a university, because there's just no other way of talking about it in French.
Well, I would say chercheurs indépendants, and actually we started a partner group up in France for that very reason. But yeah, but being an independent scholar in France is where I am. I don't know if you're in Canada or in France, or
I'm in Montreal, yeah.
Well, in France, it's really, really difficult to be, to position yourself as an independent scholar.
Sorry, hello, my name is Linda Baines. I'm a colleague of Amanda's, but I represent here there is a UK partner group, if you like, of the National Coalition of Independent Scholars called FIRE UK, which is the Forum for Independent Research Endeavours. On our mailing list, I think we've got about nearly 90 people now, and that's growing very rapidly. So there is an appetite for scholars, independent and affiliated, of all disciplines, and not just historians. I'm business management, that kind of thing, higher education research. So there is a demand for independent scholars, researchers, to come together and to find their own networks and their own people, their own tribe. Thank you.
I wonder, I mean, I think this has kind of multiple histories, doesn't it? I mean, there is, at the beginning of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, a tremendous anxiety about, who was, quote, professional and who was amateur, right? And I still think that there's that complexity in English studies, for example. There are, I mean, I'm not saying that independent scholars are amateurs, but there's also, that is, I think, the anxiety, that prioritized the term academic. Whereas it seems to me now in contemporary Britain, if somebody asks you what you do and you say you're an academic, it's not a proud, it's not a proud occupation at all. I think similarly, scholarship is also, a self-aggrandizing, if you like, term involved with keeping, keeping amateurs out. I mean, I say amateurs, I mean not employed by the university. I mean, I think that's just such a slur. I mean, it seems to me anyone can be a scholar, whatever their affiliation is. I just think there's lots of discourses. I mean, a nonfiction writer sounds to me like, the Society of Authors, right? And, and the commercial sector, where they don't know what to do. I mean, fiction being the dominant term, right? What do we do if we don't do fiction? We do nonfiction. I mean, it's so lamentable. It's, it's just so lamentable. So, I mean, I do think there's a kind of a cluster, if you like, of anxieties. And I do think myself that independent is quite useful because it does kind of insist that it's not, an alternative swamp, if you like, or necessarily an othering. It's not a, I do think it's not an occlusion of all these other terms that are really fighting for dominance, and so I think independence isn't bad. Sorry?
I think somebody's just not muted, having a side conversation.
Oh, sorry. I just think independent isn't bad. I think it's quite a reasonable kind of carpetbag, if you like, dealing with all these anxieties and these, prisons of terms and, attempts to keep people out and, keep people in. And I think it's a real mire, and if we, I mean, it seems to me it's perfectly respectable if you don't want to be an independent scholar and you just simply want to be an historian. I mean, that's fine.
Can I jump in again? Because what I hear you saying is that it's validation. How do we validate ourselves? For NCIS to apply for membership, we actually apply a very strict vetting procedure, and mainly it's on peer-reviewed publications. So it is taking that academic system, but there are also academic blogs which we take into account. But where do you sit when you don't have peer-reviewed publications, when you are publishing yourself? You're publishing books on history. We can't read every book that everybody has written when they apply for membership. The point is we have high academic standards, and that means that affiliation to NCIS is actually worth something, and it's accepted by journals and so on. But for people who don't have a PhD, who have not gone down that academic route, how do we validate the work of independent scholars? I'd be really interested to hear from the non-fiction authors out there.
That's a tricky one. I don't publish in academic journals at all because obviously not having a university affiliation, I'm not really on that circuit because I pretty much fell into trade writing. The only way I publish smaller articles and things is via, my own website. or the odd journal or magazine article, such as History
Mhm.
Today or BBC History. Those are my outlets. I don't have any academic outlets per se. So I consider myself, I'm a bit out on a limb, really.
I also think there's an in between, because I like Helen, publish in trade publishing, not academic publishing. I have been approached by various academic journals to say, would I do something for them? And I do, but that is based on my trade publishing history. And I think that academic journals don't particularly put up much of a barricade. If you have some publishing track record, it doesn't have to be with the University of X Press. If you publish work, but how you start, I mean, to go back to Amanda's point, how you get there in the first place, if you haven't got this publication history, is a separate question. I mean, I think Helen and I are in an unusual position as people who have sort of come in from the general trade publishing side.
I think there's one difference we haven't mentioned yet between the panelists. I don't earn a living from my scholarship. I was ecstatic and very surprised that RSVP awarded me the field development grant for the work I've been doing for 10 years on my website, to be able to now bring it to the next level. And that actually changed my whole identity. It used to be that research was a hobby, and some people go to conventions as their hobby. You need to pay to go to the convention. I pay to go to conferences. People who do model airplanes need to buy paint to do their hobby. I might need to pay to travel to go to libraries. It's a hobby. But the moment I get paid for it, then it's not just about what do I feel like doing. I have, there are new incentives and also stakeholders. So it feels less, independent could have meant hobbyist for me, but now I'm no longer completely independent and reliant only on what I feel like doing. I'm in relation with the RSVP community. And it's not a bad thing. It was just unexpected. But yeah, I earn a living as a freelance translator, and a copy editor, and a few other things. So yeah.
Same here. That's how I earn my living. For research, I do not get paid a penny for research.
And that's a difference between Helen and Judith.
None of us get paid.
I started out the same way, though. I started out, my route into writing full-time history was via academic copy editing, proofreading, copy editing. Then I was asked to desk edit. And I finally took a huge leap of faith and took the plunge and started writing my own stuff. And it was only because, strangely, an academic whose book I'd been copy editing, and we came to England. He was Irish, and we were sitting down going through all my copy edit and all my queries together, side by side. And halfway through, he suddenly stopped, and he turned and he said to me, he said, "Why aren't you writing your own stuff? Why are you copy editing other people's? You're good at what you do." I was intensely flattered. And it took hearing that from somebody else to give me the confidence to then think, well, maybe I should think about seriously writing my own history, till then I'd been copy editing other people's history, and of course I worked for Blackwell and OUP, so it was academic history. So I had a background in academia in the sense of the texts I was dealing with was sort of academic, but it took someone else to push me to make that big leap. And I'm proud to say I earn my living entirely by writing. And of course, that's probably what sets me and maybe Judith apart as well, is that we literally live by our writing. We don't have an academic salary as well.
And of course, what that does, which takes us off in a slightly different path, is that is obviously a huge privilege and opportunity. It equally says to us certain topics, certain subjects are off limits.
Absolutely.
There are plenty of things I've wanted to research and write about that my agent has looked at me pathetically and said, how am I going to sell that?
Oh, I know that so well.
You know that look
so well.
And you know, my first agent, that for my second book, he actually sat there and he said, "That's a £10,000 idea.
Yeah,
that's a £2,000 idea." I mean, you know, you just can't make a living at it. And there are lots of subjects I would have loved to have dealt with that either I might one day when I decide, you know, okay, I'm semi-retired, or I just have to leave it because I can't.
But that's the big difference, you see. We as professional trade writers have to write what the market will buy, whereas independent scholars, provided they have a means of supporting themselves, can research and anything they like, anything that they're passionate about without those constraints. But I've had exactly the same issues with previous agents and publishers. In fact, 10 years ago, I was told no one would want to publish my Mary Seacole biography. But look how times change.
And this really, I think this addresses Amanda's question about validation in part, and also Marie's point about RSVP. And just to bring it down to Victorian and periodical studies, is that, you know, our affiliate, people have more than one affiliation. You know, their affiliations aren't just with the places that from which they get a salary. They have lots of affiliations, and in our cases, we have, if we're lucky and we're smart about it, we have affiliations with other practitioners, right? With other historians, through places like Sharp and MVSA and, you know, the regional societies and RSVP. And those can be, I have often put RSVP down as my affiliation. Somebody insisted that I put something on my, because I feel, you know, these are my peeps, you know, I feel a very close affiliation with the society. And this is where, you know, RSVP has been particularly good about addressing the needs of independent scholars. And one of the ways in which it did that was because Eileen Curran, who is the founder of the Feast as far as RSVP's activities as a funding body, she, as a professor emeritus for many years from a small college in Maine, was an independent scholar in effect. And she insisted that the current fellowships, for example, which were the first fellowships RSVP gave, would be available to anybody anywhere. It didn't matter if they were retired. It didn't matter if they were a graduate student. It didn't matter whether they were affiliated or unaffiliated. It just mattered what they were doing. What they were doing interesting or important? I mean, I don't feel a need to be validated as an independent scholar. I don't feel any need to draw attention to the fact that I'm an independent scholar. I want the validation I want is for my work. You know, is it useful to other people who are interested in Victorian periodicals or Victorian culture or, you know, whatever other field it is. So, yeah, sorry to ramble, but I think the scholarly societies have a very important role to play, particularly for people who aren't affiliated with universities.
following on from Patrick's point, I'd like to return to the question of peer review, which Judith mentioned. And it seems to me that in scholarly publishing, there is no disadvantage to not having an academic affiliation. I co-edited a monograph series, and I can think of at least 2 recent monographs by people who, under our term today, would be called independent scholars. Their manuscripts went out to peer review, got good reports, and we published. Now, I can't speak for scholarly journals because I've not edited one, but I don't think, at least in my experience, there is a barrier to scholarly publishing, as I just said, to someone without an academic affiliation.
I've never had any problem publishing. Even before I joined NCIS, I just say independent researcher and I go for it. And who was it who said, was it Marie, who said you were a proud independent researcher? That is absolutely it. You have to be proud of the quality of your work. Everything rests in the quality of your work. Affiliation, you know, PhDs, all the rest of it, that is not the point. The point is the quality of your work. But it's a matter of persuading people that it is good.
And to me, that seems to be the crossover between our panelists here for those who work at trade publishing, if that's the term we're using for that, where the quality of the scholarship and the topics, but both Helen and Judith, you've mentioned that sometimes that doesn't always help because the topics that you'd like to research that you know, obviously will put in all the time and effort to do, maybe the market doesn't want. And so there are other types of, it seems to me there might be other types of gatekeepers in that line where it's the market research and the editors and the agents who are the ones kind of calling that versus, you know, that academic side of things where you have that academic salary to do the research. It's just a comment that I had, that it seems to me that there might be, that's where that common line could be potentially. It's just maybe different types of ways around that, because I think we can all agree that the quality of the scholarship is really what's going to get people interested. And I think that's true no matter whether you're coming up in the commercial side of things or the academic side of things. That's just
you know, the constraints are really, really tough. I've been having an enormous ding dong with my American publisher over the title of my new book, the cover of my new book. These kind of things are controlled, and I found this particularly with America, I have to say, totally by the marketing men and Barnes and Noble. Now, if the marketing and Barnes and Noble don't like your cover, it gets changed. You can kick and scream all you like. You have no ultimate power of veto over such things in the trade, and it's really tough, you know. And they call the shots. I was told, for example, that the book that's coming out next spring, if I didn't have the right cover for it, Barnes and Noble would push it to the back of the non-fiction shelves. I was literally told that. I had to have a particular wording in the title and a particular kind of image on the front. So this is where, okay, you know, I earn a good living as a writer, but I don't have the freedom to really go off and write about things that interest me, like independent scholars probably have.
Well, the academic marketplace is also very policed and prescribed. And, you know, I'm sure many academics here have had arguments about not only subject matter, but the way the book looks and what can be included. And I mean, publishers are, you know, a reality. And, you know, the market is very important here. And, you know, I mean, I remember once trying to negotiate a low price for one of our books, you know, with a publisher, and we had to go around to about 5 publishers to make sure that the Dictionary of 19th Century Journalism was £50, no more. You know, it took huge efforts, even though readers approved of the, you know, the market people in the press said, well, we could take this book, but it will cost £150 and only libraries will have it.
Yeah.
You know, so the publishing industry is, you know, is something to reckon with. And they're certainly, on the whole, not benevolent. You know, and at the moment they are very squeezed by, you know, the challenges of digital production and so on. So, I mean, you know, no, I mean, that's why the Society of Authors exists, right? Because there's such tension with publishers. Yeah, and they can sometimes help. The
Harry,
society.
we have a question in the chat from Jasmine about whether or not copywriting is a common starting point of career routes. And I know Helen has reflected on this.
Copy editing, not copywriting.
Forgive me, Helen. So Jasmine's question is about copywriting, but she says she's coming to the end of her MA and considering her options, but hasn't had much career advice in relation to how you might get into those things. I know, Marie, you've responded a little in the chat, but perhaps could comment further.
Yeah, so a lot of people seem to be doing things with language. I wouldn't have thought of doing that, but I was studying in the UK and people were amazed that I could work in 2 languages. That automatically made me a translator for some reason. And that was weird for me as a North American because there are degrees in translation. So if I can talk about that for other people around who do master 2 languages, I cannot get a job as a translator. They would want me to have a degree in translation. Again, this is North American. And that's the other issue with giving career advice. It's very, very location specific. My clients, however, do not give a damn. They never ask for a CV. All they want to know is my rates and if I can do it in time. And what has been hard is I was able to start freelancing because I had wide networks through the political activism I had done. I did party politics and I did student politics. So those people ended up having much better jobs than me. And they could hire me to do some of that language work. And through that, I started therefore having, through word of mouth, I got a wider set of clients. But it is a gig industry. And so you run into the same problems as any other freelancer.
Can I just second what Marie has said? You're absolutely spot on. The ironic thing is that I'm also a freelance translator, French English, and I actually got a job teaching on the translation studies course at my local university. I do not have any translation studies background. I just do the job. And from what I've seen of translation studies, I wouldn't bother to do a translation degree, to be honest. You know, there are other ways of becoming proficient. So if anybody says to you, you need to go and do a PhD in translation, don't believe it. Yeah, like Marie says, the rates are what people really want to know. Anyway, just wanted to second that. Thank you.
Judith, I know you mentioned to me that you worked for a number of years in publishing before transitioning to write your own things. I wondered if you might want to speak to a little bit of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very helpful to me. I started working, I mean, when I was 20 in publishing. I was a baby copy editor and gradually, you know, I worked my way up through various publishing companies, trade publishing. So I had a background in fiction, nonfiction, general publishing. It was therefore a huge advantage to me when I decided to, you know, go gamekeeper turned poacher and become a writer, because I knew agents and I knew how the system worked. You know, when Helen talks about Barnes and Noble and things, and I think, well, yeah. I mean, publishers don't get a say either. They get pushed around by the Barnes and Nobles of the world. I mean, I've published, I don't know, a dozen books, I think. I don't think one book maybe has the title I originally gave it. I think 11 of my 12 books, I have not been allowed to have the title I wanted them to have. That's just the deal. I mean, you know, unless you're J.K. Rowling. And tragically, it's not a mistake. It doesn't, you know, it says Judith Flanders there. It's not a mistake. I'm not J.K. Rowling.
Can I jump in? I don't know how to do this. Bob Patton, and I don't know if you're hearing me or seeing me.
We're hearing you, Bob.
Several little points to consider. The last several books that I've done, it has turned, the title has been determined in a way by the search engines.
Yeah.
They want to have before the colon the largest capacious context. So instead of saying I once was a blue-haired heron, comma, the poetry of so-and-so, no, nobody's ever going to get a blue-haired heron search. But if you say Dickens and then say something else like and the sewer systems, you'll get a lot of searches. And this is the way so many people purchase books online. And so even beyond publishers, what we're all learning is a new system of publicity that we as authors have our own code words for, but the general public or even the book buyers in libraries have different sort of theories. The other thing I just wanted to say, because of the last couple of generations of students I've taught, PhD, they started out as academics, and they may have ended up going on. On the last Mellon seminar I gave, three of the five people went into editing, and the other two went on to writing original fiction. And so they were academics that transferred into the independent category. If they did go on in some parts of their dissertation or published in journals, SEL has never asked for an academic, title for any paper that comes to us, and many of them come. We're in fact proud of the fact that we choose papers that come from young students that were just graduating and moving on in their careers. And I've had several people with incredibly distinguished careers say they're still proud of the one they did 50 years ago for SEL, because that was a distinction. So I don't even understand the term independent anymore. One of my students who was at the time, he redid his dissertation, came out as a very fine book, University of Edinburgh Press. And he was chosen as the Independent Scholar of the Year by the MLA last fall, when he had a full-time job in a college in the middle of China. So he was employed, but a lot of this work had been done between jobs for him. And so his status was only temporarily not funded by university. Well, in other words, just everything that you all are saying is fascinating to me since I've retired for the last 10 years. But I think it's awfully hard, as somebody used the word prisons, I think it was you actually, Laurel, that used it, of academic titles and things. We do float, as Patrick said, we do float among our many titles.
So I had a question for Patrick. We've been hearing about writing for a living. I've mentioned freelancing. Did you have a day job? Can somebody talk about having a day job and doing research in their free time?
Yeah, well, I had a day job as a museum curator, a history museum. So it was history related. And it was, I recently retired. That's why I'm speaking of it in the past tense. But yeah, it was, I found it very fulfilling in a way. I, for various reasons, I needed to stay in Chicago or in the Chicago area, and there just were no British history jobs in Chicago when I had got my PhD. And I had been, while working on my dissertation, I'd been working part-time at this museum. And you know, it was, I never thought I'd wind up doing this much local history. But I found it very fulfilling in a lot of ways. You know, but I had to, you know, it was obviously a constraint. I didn't pay very much, for one thing. And it was also a constraint on my freedom of being, you know, I had to, but it was a case where I was able to work out a semi-flexible schedule, you know, that I could say, well, you know, I'm going to need these couple of weeks this summer to go to England, you know, and I'm going to need this weekend to, you know, to do it where we, you know, I'd have to choose a weekend where we didn't have a program going on that, where I could go to the conference that I wanted to go to, things like that. So yeah, I did that, and it was nice to be doing that kind of history, you know, and you know, writing articles about this local history and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, that was good. But you know, once again, there's a huge variety of the kinds of jobs that so-called independent scholars, unaffiliated with university scholars, are doing. Some of them are cobbling together a couple of part-time jobs. Some of them are adjuncting, you know. Some of them are working in something completely different. You know, they're lawyers, or they're in business. I know one who just you know, after applying to 50 different places and not getting any interviews, even after publishing a book, a really good book, he started his own business with a friend of his, you know, doing something completely different. So, and it's important to me as a scholar that people like that are not lost to scholarship, which can easily happen. And I think it's part of it's really incumbent on us who work closely with scholarly societies to do outreach and support to people in that situation.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wanted to build a community once I met Simon in the chat of actually the Sharp conference that was online last year, is to offer a space for people who are finishing their PhDs or finishing a postdoc and don't know what's coming next, and for them to know that it's not the end of the world. And we've been discussing a lot of difficulties, but if you're stuck sort of like in both worlds of like, you want an academic job, you need to pay the bills at the moment, and it feels like it's so much mental load to be holding all these different identities, because also whenever you're applying for a job, you need to pretend like that's the thing you want the most in the whole world. So each time you're applying for a job, be it an academic job or another type of job, you need to invest yourself. And so for people who are seeing less and less the hope of finding an academic job that they were first gunning for, or for whom it's just too much, it can also reduce the burden to decide, okay, I'm no longer searching for an academic job. And then you might find, yeah, there's that project I always wanted to do, but that didn't look good on my academic CV. But now screw that, I can do that. It could change the way you're looking at your life, your research, and you might find it freeing.
Terrible secret that we haven't uttered is that the likelihood with the jobs that are being offered these days is that the work in academia will fight against any possibility of doing the research you want to do. I mean, you're teaching early courses with large numbers of students and lots of papers, and you're on committees, and it's, you know, when I came into the world 80 years ago, there were really opportunities to take time out and write as a part of what I was supposed to be doing as an instructor. But it's really tough for people in the academic world now to do that.
Yeah, I wondered if the panelists might comment on that. That's a big question I have as somebody who's still in my PhD, but even thinking about more broadly, you know, whether or not I go into academia or not, how do you find the time to do all the, you know, in-depth types of research? One of the, I think, for lack of a better term, benefits of being a graduate student is that this is my job. I need to research and write. That's what I'm here to do aside from my teaching, which pays for the bills. So how do you find that time and the space to write these types of in-depth work?
So for the longest time, I did not write because I hated writing. What I liked, that's the other thing. It gives you the freedom to decide which bits of scholarship you like. And for those who have met me at RSVP conferences, I love conferences. I love hanging out with people. So that's the thing. So I would see a CFP, I'd propose something, I'd get accepted, I'd prepare some slides. I never wrote what I was going to say, and then I'd ad-lib the thing. And then through meeting people, people asked me to write stuff. So I was forced because it's so nice. You ask me if I could write something. Of course I'll write something. Then I had to like go through a lot of anxiety. But so it's through commitments to conferences and then commitments to people. If I don't have that drive coming from outside, I probably won't by myself start researching stuff.
This is a political issue, right? It's a political issue for lecturers, you know, and university teachers about making room in the syllabus for our research. And, you know, refusing as far as possible, you know, encroachments on our work that make research impossible. And I mean, you know, I had a different experience than Bob because we were fighting for research time from the beginning, you know, of my work at Aberystwyth. And, you know, we had to guard it. I remember, you know, just putting whole days per week, you know, at least a day, plus weekends, of course, for research, and just refusing to do things, you know, I mean, really saying to myself, that's my day in a library, or what I'm, you know, the book I'm writing or the article I'm writing. And I know at Birkbeck at certain points, we tried to curtail the summer term so that we were left research time, you know, and to prevent the encroachment, more teaching, more admin, more committees. You know, I mean, it was a real battle throughout my experience as a university teacher. It was a tremendous battle. It is a matter of university politics, you know, how much managers are going to require from us. And at a point where we say, no, we won't do that. I do think it's a political issue about research time. And there has to be a system which, I mean, as long as our institutions are structured to require us to do research for promotion, for credibility, for the institution, of course, which wants to claim grants and so on, you know, in our name, right? You know, then they have to make it possible. And I mean, I know that in British universities, we had annual interviews, and we still do have annual interviews about how our research is going. And another element there was sabbaticals every 7 terms. You know, getting the institution to agree to sabbaticals. And that was, you know, that was a real battle. So anyway, I just think it is a matter of organized politics. I found that, you know, the union was helpful at times, but more to the point, our department was pretty agreed about, you know, how to protect and enable research time. I don't know, I'd love to hear about other people's experience who are working now. Of course, we've managed research, and university teachers do. The advantage of teaching is that sometimes the courses you teach can overlap with your research if you have that opportunity.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Judith or Helen. How do you build research? How do you do your research for your books and your writing? Is it, as Marie said, like, you know, she's driven by the conference things. Are you driven by sort of obviously you're driven by your deadlines, but how do you?
Well, I was fascinated by Marie's comment because to me, the idea of going to conferences sounds like 7 kinds of hell. You know, the thing that's great about being a writer is that you can go, oh, months without talking to anybody.
Yeah.
You know, I have closer relationships with the issue desk people at the British Library than I do with my family. I mean, I bring them cookies. I do. I think that it is very much, I mean, you know, people say, you know, I produced, I think it's 12 books in 20 years. And it's easy. I don't have a day job. So
Yeah.
I go to the library and I get there at 9:30 in the morning and I leave at 5 in the evening, and that's what I do. And it's very different from trying to fit it around an academic life. I think, I mean, one of the things that has changed hugely, of course, in the last year that I know cropped up elsewhere in the conversation, that how do we manage as independent researchers with online databases and journals and so on and access. And that is, I'd love to hear more about what other people do, because that's a huge problem. I mean, I have borrowed the identity of a friend of mine at an unnamed university, and I use his sign-on. And yeah, my only panic is that he is now over 90, and I'm terrified that I'm going to lose it. I mean, I like him too, but I really like his sign-on.
I totally agree. That is a real issue for me. I mean, when I particularly for digitized newspapers, which I really rely on for my work. So I pay expensive subscriptions, but there are also other things that you can only get through academia, i.e. being affiliated to a university, and unless you get it through the university, it would just cost too much to get on all these databases. So I was absolutely delighted when JSTOR made a lot of stuff available during COVID, and you know, a lot, otherwise I didn't have access to JSTOR. But you know, it's really hard when that is one of the downsides of being a non-university lecturer or not having that access. But I count myself lucky that the major source for me, certainly recently, has been British Library newspapers. They are absolutely my lifesaver. It's the most brilliant database. And also recently, doing Russians in Paris, it was Gallica, which was free. But it really, really annoys me when I go on some of these subscription databases where they give you certain newspapers. Then if you find a reference you want, you click on it and say, but you've got to subscribe or pay a bit more to get to see this one. So like Judith, I have slightly gone through the back door with academic friends occasionally when I can't access something, i.e. ProQuest is one of the things I can't always get to. But I count myself lucky that I've managed to access as much as I have, actually, with things being opened up. But it's like Judith says, you know, that when you don't have an academic affiliation or a job where you've got to turn up and give lectures and prepare stuff, it's just me and the dog. I live alone. I count myself incredibly lucky and privileged that I sit here in West Dorset and I write and I work with my head down. And I've completed 2 100,000 word books inside a year. And that's because of COVID mainly. But nevertheless, I'm able to totally selfishly focus in a way that others can't. And I'm very lucky. I know how lucky I am to be able to do that, because when I work unbelievably intensively, and I generally write a book inside 16 months, start to finish.
So as I mentioned in the chat, one of the members of our community advertised to us the fact that you can ask universities to be an affiliated researcher. So she went to, I think it's Georgia Tech, and when she finished her PhD, I think she might have done a postdoc after that, but I don't know if I think they told her, do you want to stay on as an affiliated researcher? But that provides her with access to the library and to the databases. So that can be an option you look at a university wherever you live.
I was going to mention that too.
Public libraries will get a big, like Oxford Public Library or a big town or a city. They now generally have subscriptions, say Dictionary of National Biography, the Times Index, British Library newspapers. So you can now access through your library, your public library card. Sorry, Patrick.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, I was just going to say that access to databases is obviously crucial. And one way is to investigate guest privileges at a nearby research library. Another way is, now and then there are programs, and we should try to encourage this within the academic world. There are programs that individual departments will have. For example, Northwestern, I just stumbled into this years ago, went to a lecture by Bill Hake about Victorian intellectual life or something, and got to talking to him afterwards, and he asked, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing this job and I'm trying to write this book. And he said, well, you should our department, our history department, has a program for where you become an associate faculty or something. That's some name for it, department associate. That gives you, it doesn't pay a dime, but it gives you all this library access. And I think that was a great idea, and it was specifically for people who are doing scholarly work but aren't affiliated with the university or any other university. So I think it would be great if more English and history departments thought about this. It costs them nothing, and it would build a lot of goodwill and I think result in a lot of good scholarship.
Especially for writers like me who are right out in the sticks. So a trip to the British Library, through where I could access a lot of these databases on just a standard membership card, is 4.5 hours train ride each way. And so that's not viable. That's why I found the last few years, since particularly I've been in Dorset, I've had to rely on being able to access more and more material remotely.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to be mindful that we are at the hour and a little bit over, actually. So if anybody needs to go, please feel free. We don't have to stop the conversation. In fact, most of our salons have gone for about 90 minutes. This also includes for our panelists. If you do need to go, thank you for your insights. But I just wanted to make people aware of that. But we'll keep the conversation going as long as it's hopping.
Got to go. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Bob.
So we have a question from Alexandra Kaari for Helen. Are there online sources for Russian history research that you can recommend?
Yes, there is more and more being made available in Cyrillic. I don't know whether she means actually in Russian or in English about Russia, but there's really been quite an explosion of Russian material going online in the last 10 years. So, well, I mean, it obviously depends what your subject area is. For example, in the Romanovs, which is one of my specialisms, GARF, which is a big state archive in Moscow, has made a massive amount of material available online. A lot of the letters and diaries and things relating to the actual family are online, but also importantly, they posted a lot of the documents relating to the murder of the Romanovs and in Ekaterinburg a few years ago, which really was a big help to scholars because everything, of course, was so closed off before the collapse of communism. But the Russians are catching up slowly, and there is more and more stuff. You just have to keyword search frantically in Cyrillic, as I do. Sometimes you get some rather weird stuff back. The only thing I find with Russian history searching online for is the Russians have this terrible penchant for conspiracy theories. So there's some rather wacky stuff out there.
One of the issues I found trying to trace independent scholars or contact them is that some people are not on social media and don't have a website or another sort of web presence. And so it's hard to find their emails. And so for that reason, we've created a directory, which is certainly, well, there must be many out there, but that was the idea behind creating a directory for the people within our community. But yeah, maybe that's something people want to talk about, how much time you guys need to spend on your online presence, given that you don't have a department web page or you're not in the directory of a university.
It's essential. In my position, and probably Judith too, the pressure publishers put on you is that you must do social media. You've got to have a Twitter presence, a Facebook presence. You've got to let people know when you've got an article or a book or a talk or anything going up, because of course you don't have the normal channel of a university community or an association as some of you other independent scholars have. So I'm terribly reliant, really, regretfully so, on Facebook and Twitter for getting my message out to readers and people who might be interested in my work. But it's a fact of life. We have to do social media. Publishers expect it.
Yeah, Judith talked me into joining Twitter some years back, and I've forgiven her for that. No, actually, it has turned out to be great. I mean, it's all in who you follow, right? So
exactly.
if you follow witty, interesting people, you're going to have witty, interesting things to read. But I think it's very important. I admire Marie for doing what I think we all need to do, and that is, if we need a community and we don't find it, build it yourself.
Yeah.
And so. You've got to do outreach. I mean, there's really no excuse for any Victorianist, for example, not to be on Twitter. There's too much information there about events and all sorts of things that you're not gonna find on your email, and you're not gonna find necessarily on Facebook. It is really a good way of keeping in touch with individual people, but also just getting a sense of what kind of scholarship is out there. I think that's so. And Victoria, by the way, there's no excuse for not being on Victoria either. Let me just mention this.
I would like to add, because Patrick is very modest and shy, that I think for me, starting off when I did, coming from publishing, knowing no one in academia, I found Victoria was a lifeline. And I have continued to find it a lifeline.
That's good.
It's one of those things that you can just throw out the most random queries, and 47 people will say, that's my specialty. And you think, no, I mean, this cannot be anybody's specialty. Don't be silly. And it is. It is a truly remarkable place to be.
Thank you. I mean, I thank you on behalf of all of us on Victoria. By the way, let me just mention, I really want to have a sort of steering committee for Victoria to ensure its longevity. So anybody within the sound of my voice who's interested in being on a committee or just being available to help moderate things and keep it going, drop me a note. pleary@gmail, and we'll talk.
End of plug.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry for that. Yeah,
another
I was the modest guy, right? Forget it.
We have another question in the chat from Jasmine around setting your own rates and fair rates of pay for publications, which again, I mean, I think the Society of Authors have already been mentioned this evening or this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are. So I wondered if, you know, money is always a difficult subject, isn't it? But I wonder if any of our panelists would be willing to talk about how one begins to set your own rates or to deal with that. You know, is it simply an issue of having agents, or perhaps you could expand on that for Jasmine.
I don't. Sorry. In my case, you know, you can't set a rate. You have an agent who negotiates a fee, as Judith will know. You really are at the mercy of the best deal your agent can get you.
So I guess then the next question is, how does one get an agent? And another one I'd add is about speaking fees, because we're used to conferences where we pay to go speak to people. And then whenever I tell someone I'm going to a conference, they're like, oh, okay, so like, how much are they paying you? It's like, no, other way around. But there are some instances where you end up doing what you think is a conference paper, but is actually public speaking. And so has anybody done that, and how did they set their rates?
I can answer it, but I don't want to hog the conversation. As far as speaking is concerned, well, that is a really tricky thing. Sometimes you'll be offered a good fee. Other times you'll be asked to record something or an interview or a, you know, Q&A or whatever, you know, especially for TV and film. And the money's very arbitrary. Sometimes you're almost made to feel that you should feel flattered that you've been asked to say something for, you know, a soundbite or two for a TV program, say. So it's very variable. Sometimes it's a very small fee. The only times I've ever been, I would say, really well paid for a speaking engagement is in America. I don't know if that's Judith's experience.
I haven't even been well paid in America. Lucky you.
Only once, I hasten to add. That was the Rancho Mirage Festival.
Oh, I had an invitation from them. I said no. It sounded like my idea of hell. People.
It was a bit.
It suggested you had to be nice to people, and I'm not very good at that. I think that I've never, I mean, you know, you get maybe £100, $150.
Yeah.
You know, if you're lucky, it'll cover your train fare. It won't cover the fact that you're not working for the day.
Yeah.
You get, once you get to a certain stage, you get television companies phoning you up and expecting you to talk for an hour to pick your brains on the subject, at which point they'll tell you there's no budget to pay you.
Yeah.
I now push all of those to my agent without even talking to them because it's unsustainable. The only thing I have ever been well paid for outside of writing is working as a historical consultant for a video game.
Yeah, I did historical consultancy on ITV Victoria.
Yeah, I mean, the BBC pays terribly. Doesn't cover the costs. I worked for a video game for about 6 months and earned more than I had ever earned on anything, all put together for outside non-writing projects. But, you know, the odds of a 19th century set video game are pretty few and far between. I think that you take the money that's on offer if you want to do the job. because it's never going to pay.
Or when it does pay, as in, you know, historical consultancy for television, you kind of have to sit there grinding your teeth at all the historical inaccuracies and fighting endless battles that you can never win because dramatic license rules. So that is a very mixed blessing doing that kind of work. Even though it's well paid, you have to compromise your standards.
Well, or you say, look, I'm telling you the way it was. What you do with it is your business. You know, but I think in terms of setting fees for lectures, for talks, for school visits, all of those things that people do, you know, they've got budgets. You're not going to get a living wage. It's not going to cover your time plus your travel.
So you wouldn't advise trying to get media consultancy gigs, and anyways, you got them through your publications?
I think that that comes with publication and with profile. So if you do the talks and if you do the talking head on whatever it is, or a radio call-in program or whatever, you do that for profile. I don't think you can think of it as making a living. I think of it as publicity.
Yeah. Well, that's the argument the BBC have always traditionally given you when you're asked to go and do an interview either on TV or radio. Oh, but it's free publicity for you. So no, we don't pay a fee, or we'll pay you 50 quid for getting there. So in a way, a lot of outfits trade on that. They say, oh, but it's promoting your book or, you know, your reputation. So there's this idea that it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Thank you for your openness about this, because it's one thing to talk about all the things we can do, and it's another thing to talk about, is it bringing in money or is it doing something else? So thanks for your honesty.
I think generally any kind of commercial consultancy, if you're offered it, as with Judith doing the gaming thing, often is the best paid, much better paid even than writing good history. So yeah, I got paid, you know, for doing a consultancy for Royal Mail stamps, writing and checking all the copy for the anniversary issue for Victoria and Albert in 2019. You can get all kinds of interesting sideline jobs that often turn up out of the blue, but you will only get that kind of work, which can be reasonably well paid. You'll only get it if you've got a web presence. You have to have a web presence, and you have to actually make a point of keeping it alive. You have to keep updating your website so it doesn't look stale and tired, because, you know, it's instant gratification. People want to get online, put in a keyword search, say Romanovs, and they'll get Helen Rappaport because I've written on the Romanovs extensively, or Queen Victoria because I've written on Queen Victoria. And you have to work at developing that web presence and having a website that picks up the keyword searches. When that is absolutely crucial, that your website has the right triggers so that people can find you.
Maybe Karen could expand on the question she just posted in the chat. So personally,
let me turn on my video so you can see me. I don't know. Am I showing up? Hi. Yeah, I'm kind of dressed down today, so I didn't have my video on earlier. Well, I've just got projects that have been languishing for a few years because I got talked into doing somebody else's projects. So I want to get back to my master's thesis project, which I had wanted to turn into a book. And I'm kind of at the point where I'd like to get some feedback from some people who I guess are familiar enough with the topics I'm writing on to kind of push me in finding additional research, or maybe they would have the kind of questions to ask me that give me an idea of what I really need to pursue. And as far as the website, I really don't have a professional website. I do have a WordPress blog, but I generally just write about photography and crafts, and it's a non-professional thing. And it's just been languishing for the past 4 or 5 months anyways. But
Karen, are these Victorian projects?
the thing I'm working on right now, I was talked into writing 2 chapters for an open access textbook on the history of science and technology. So I'm kind of in the middle of the Industrial Revolution right now. But my personal project is it's Victorian detectives, detective fiction, and journalism. And one of my main points in it is that a lot of the growth of the professional metropolitan detectives in the 19th century, I really think a lot of it was driven through journalism's constant repeating of news. It's like it's kind of like we see now on the Facebook and the internet, is the more something is repeated, the bigger problem it appears to be. So my idea is that, you know, without the newspapers, the detective force probably would have taken much longer to grow. So it's, I've got several threads that I'm pursuing. I'm just trying to get it all sorted out so that the piece isn't going in every direction at once.
Well, there's a lot of activity in that scholarly area right now. Claire Clark has a new book out about Sherlock Holmes and his imitators. And in fact, you could do a lot worse than to go on Twitter and get on Claire Clark's Twitter feed. She's at Trinity College Dublin. And there are a lot of the people who are on her feed are working on detective fiction. So that would be my first suggestion to you, is to sort of see, you know, since you're reviving these, I have a lot of projects like that too, where they've been sitting around so long, I haven't been paying enough attention to what's been written recently about these things. And so it's kind of catching up and seeing what other people have written. And of course, there's a lot, needless to say, a lot being written about journalism and crime journalism right now. So yeah, I think it'd be good to, you know, to check the usual suspects like the Victorian Periodicals Review and some of these others to see, you know, what's happening in the field, and try to connect with some of those people who are working on it.
Yeah.
Any other questions here for our panelists? Okay, I think with that, I think we've all had a great round. Thank you again for everyone for coming, and thank you again to our panelists for lending their time and expertise for this wonderful conversation to wrap up our salons.
Thanks.
So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, and great to meet you all.
Yeah.
Great to meet you.